Chapter 1: A Shadow over Zurich Suites. It was a typically dreary London afternoon in late October, the sort that seemed to press down upon Baker Street with a palpable weight, leaching the colour from the rooftops and the ardour from one's spirit. For weeks, the atmosphere within our humble chambers had been oppressively calm, a state which, to my esteemed companion, was arguably more distressing than the most perplexing of homicides. A succession of trifling domestic matters, a lost brooch here, a disputed will there, had left Holmes in a state of profound ennui, a condition I knew well portended an impending tempest of either genius or despair. He paced the worn Persian rug with the restlessness of a caged tiger, his hawk-like features drawn, his pipe often cold in his hand. "Watson," he declared abruptly one afternoon, casting himself into his armchair with a sigh that bordered on a groan, "this existence is becoming insufferable. My brain, my dear fellow, feels as though it is submerged in treacle, sticky and slow. Where are the grand conspiracies? The intricate deceptions? The very fabric of London society seems to have settled into a placid, uninteresting hum." I, accustomed to these declarations, merely grunted from behind my medical journal. "Perhaps," I suggested mildly, "it is a testament to the effectiveness of your past endeavours, Holmes. Or perhaps the criminal underworld, having learned its lesson, has simply become more discreet." He scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Discretion, Watson, is merely a more challenging puzzle. But at present, there are no puzzles at all, only trivialities fit for a constabulary clerk." It was at this precise juncture that Mrs. Hudson, with her usual discreet knock, announced a visitor. "A gentleman, Mr. Holmes. Herr Klaus Richter, he says, from Switzerland. Looks quite agitated, if you ask me." Holmes's eyes, previously dull with boredom, flickered with a rekindled spark. "Switzerland, you say? Show him in, Mrs. Hudson, show him in at once." A moment later, a figure entered who seemed to personify Mrs. Hudson's description. Herr Richter was a man of perhaps 50 years, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, though its precision was undermined by the rumpled appearance of his cravat and the disarray of his sandy hair. His eyes, a troubled blue, darted about the room, betraying a profound anxiety that transcended mere travel weariness. He clutched a leather attaché case as if it contained the very secrets of the universe. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice thick with a German accent, yet carefully modulated, "it is an honor, sir. I have travelled from Zurich on the urgent recommendation of Inspector Lestrade, who assured me you are the only man in Europe capable of discerning the truth when all others see only shadows." Holmes waved him to the chair opposite, observing him with an unnerving intensity. "Inspector Lestrade is generous, Herr Richter. Pray, compose yourself. Your agitation speaks of more than a mere lost item. What profound disquiet has drawn you from the serenity of your Alpine homeland?" Richter took a deep, shuddering breath. "Serenity, Mr. Holmes? There is no serenity left in Switzerland, not where our national pride is concerned. I represent the Swiss Chocolate Manufacturers Association. We are, as you undoubtedly know, renowned worldwide for the quality and purity of our product." He paused, his gaze pleading. "Or, rather, we were." "Indeed," Holmes murmured, a faint frown creasing his brow. "One rarely hears a disparaging word regarding Swiss chocolate." "Precisely!" Richter exclaimed, leaning forward. "But now, Mr. Holmes, it is as if a creeping malady has taken root. Sales have plummeted. Our exports are faltering. And the cause, sir, is entirely inexplicable." He opened his attaché case, producing a sheaf of papers. "We are besieged by complaints, Mr. Holmes. Not of spoiled goods, mind you, or obvious contamination. No. These are insidious. Consumers report a faint metallic aftertaste, a strange bitterness that lingers. Some speak of mild digestive upset, others of a persistent lassitude, even chronic fatigue. All linked, undeniably, to the consumption of our chocolate." I leaned forward, my medical interest piqued. "Have your chemists found anything? Any foreign agents, toxins?" Richter shook his head miserably. "Nothing, Dr. Watson. That is the maddening heart of it. Our laboratories, equipped with the finest apparatus, have analyzed hundreds of samples. Every batch is pure. Every ingredient pristine. Our production lines are models of hygiene. Yet the complaints persist, growing in number and severity, sowing doubt and fear amongst our most loyal clientele. Holmes had closed his eyes, his fingertips pressed together in his customary pose of deep thought. He opened them suddenly, fixing Richter with an unblinking stare. "And you believe, Herr Richter, that this is not a collective delusion, nor a mere dip in the market, but something far more sinister?" He opened his attaché case, producing a sheaf of papers. "We are besieged by complaints, Mr. Holmes. Not of spoiled goods, mind you, or obvious contamination. No. These are insidious. Consumers report a faint metallic aftertaste, a strange bitterness that lingers. Some speak of mild digestive upset, others of a persistent lassitude, even chronic fatigue. All linked, undeniably, to the consumption of our chocolate." I leaned forward, my medical interest piqued. "Have your chemists found anything? Any foreign agents, toxins?" Richter shook his head miserably. "Nothing, Dr. Watson. That is the maddening heart of it. Our laboratories, equipped with the finest apparatus, have analyzed hundreds of samples. Every batch is pure. Every ingredient pristine. Our production lines are models of hygiene. Yet the complaints persist, growing in number and severity, sowing doubt and fear amongst our most loyal clientele." Holmes had closed his eyes, his fingertips pressed together in his customary pose of deep thought. He opened them suddenly, fixing Richter with an unblinking stare. "And you believe, Herr Richter, that this is not a collective delusion, nor a mere dip in the market, but something far more sinister?" "I am convinced of it, Mr. Holmes," Richter said with quiet vehemence. "This is no accident. This is a deliberate, targeted campaign. An act of sabotage so cunningly executed that it leaves no trace, yet devastates an entire industry. We are being destroyed from within, or perhaps, by an unseen hand from without. We cannot locate the enemy, nor understand his methods. We are drowning in a sea of suspicion, unable to grasp the very water around us." He wrung his hands. "Only you, Mr. Holmes, with your legendary acumen, can pierce this veil of the impossible." A slow smile spread across Holmes's face, transforming his features from weary resignation to incandescent intellectual excitement. The challenge, so long absent, had arrived. A poison that leaves no trace. Chapter 2: The Matter of the Melted Morale. The journey to Switzerland, while swift and efficient by continental railway, seemed to stretch interminably for Holmes. His mind, now fully awakened, raced ahead, dissecting Richter's account, seeking the chinks in the armor of the seemingly impenetrable mystery. For my part, I found myself drawn to the unfolding landscape, a picturesque tableau of snow-capped peaks and verdant valleys that offered a calming counterpoint to the enigma we were pursuing. It was a nation, I reflected, whose very geography exuded an aura of purity and precision, much like the product at the heart of our investigation. Upon our arrival in Zurich, the crisp, clean air offered a refreshing contrast to the perpetual fogs of London. Yet, beneath the veneer of meticulous order, I sensed the underlying tremor of unease Herr Richter had described. We wasted no time, presenting our credentials to the local authorities, who, it must be said, regarded Holmes with a mixture of awe and bewilderment, and were swiftly granted access to several prominent chocolate factories in Zurich and subsequently, Bern. My initial impressions were, frankly, overwhelming. I had, of course, tasted Swiss chocolate countless times, but I had never before witnessed the intricate ballet of its creation. Factory after factory presented the same astonishing spectacle of industrial elegance and hygienic rigor. Stainless steel gleamed under bright lights, machinery hummed with rhythmic precision, and the air, thick with the intoxicating aroma of cocoa, sugar, and vanilla, seemed to promise nothing but unadulterated pleasure. "Observe, Holmes," I remarked to my companion as we stood in a viewing gallery overlooking a vast hall where molten chocolate flowed like a dark, glossy river into meticulously crafted molds. "Every surface is spotless. The workers, clad in pristine white, wear gloves and hairnets. The automation here is remarkable, reducing human intervention to a minimum. How could any widespread contamination, let alone a deliberate act of sabotage, occur in such an environment without immediate detection? Holmes, however, merely hummed in a noncommittal fashion, his gaze less fixed on the impressive scale of the operation and more on the minutiae. He lingered by the colossal conching machines, observing the slow, deliberate grinding of cocoa. He scrutinized the packaging lines, where perfect bars were wrapped with effortless speed. He even bent low to inspect the floor for stray fragments, though he found none. "Indeed, Watson," he finally conceded, his voice a low murmur, "your medical eye for hygiene is entirely correct. The conditions are, by any conventional measure, beyond reproach. Were the problem a simple matter of impurities or overt poison, it would be discovered almost immediately. No, the culprit here is far more subtle, a ghost in the machine, so to speak. What perplexed me most was the absolute lack of any obvious defect. I had expected to find some telltale sign, a discolored patch, an unusual texture, but the samples offered for our inspection were indistinguishable from the finest examples of the craft. And yet, the workers, while outwardly efficient, struck me as subdued. There was a certain tension in their shoulders, a quickness in their movements that seemed born not of urgency, but of anxiety. I noticed fleeting, almost imperceptible glances exchanged between colleagues, quick shifts of focus whenever a foreman or manager passed by. "You speak of a melted morale, Watson," Holmes said, almost as if reading my thoughts, as we departed one particularly vast establishment. "And you are not far off the mark. Your observations on the physical cleanliness of the factories are sound, but you miss the subtle shifts in the human element. Did you not detect the undercurrent of apprehension amongst the staff? The way Herr Schneider, the production manager, winced almost imperceptibly when I inquired about the health of his employees? The hurried, almost dismissive manner in which Fraulein Schmidt, who oversaw the tempering process, answered my questions regarding the rare occasions when a batch might be deemed off. They seemed merely diligent, Holmes, I countered, somewhat defensively. And perhaps naturally wary of strangers observing their work. Perhaps, he conceded, a glint in his eye. But diligence without ease is suspicion, Watson. And wariness is often the shadow of fear. These people, these dedicated artisans of confectionery, are not merely producing chocolate, they are enduring an unseen siege. They are convinced that something is wrong, yet their own eyes and instruments tell them otherwise. This creates an atmosphere ripe for manipulation, a perfect ground for the seeds of distrust to blossom. The problem, my dear fellow, does not lie in the pristine chocolate itself, but in the unseen hand that guides it, or rather, misguides it, at a critical juncture. He paused, adjusting his deerstalker as a chill wind swept through the Bernese streets. The fault, I am increasingly convinced, lies not within the inherent quality of Swiss chocolate, but in the insidious intervention of an external influence. Someone, Watson, is orchestrating this decline, not through overt corruption, but through a cunning psychological game, played out amidst the sweet machinery of this industrial marvel. The game, I realized, was becoming infinitely more complex, and Holmes, like a hawk spotting its prey from miles above, was already circling. Chapter 3, An Aroma of Suspicion. The following days saw Holmes immerse himself in the heart of the Swiss chocolate industry with an intensity that left even my robust constitution somewhat fatigued. We moved from factory to factory, from the grand operations of Zurich to the more artisanal establishments nestled in the valleys, Holmes refusing to let any detail escape his penetrating gaze. His methods were, as ever, peculiar and beyond the ken of ordinary investigators. He spent hours not merely observing the machinery and the workers, but also tasting, smelling, and even feeling the chocolate at various stages of its production. I watched him one afternoon in a vast tasting room, where experienced chocolatiers, with their highly trained palates, meticulously sampled small squares, noting subtle nuances of flavor and texture. They spoke of notes of hazelnut, a hint of caramel, the perfect snap of a well-tempered bar. Holmes, however, approached the task with a different sort of precision. He would take a piece, hold it to his nose, close his eyes, and then allow it to melt slowly on his tongue, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Extraordinary," he murmured at one point, pushing a small, dark square across the polished table towards me. "Pray tell, Watson, what do you detect?" I took the chocolate, savoring its rich aroma before placing it in my mouth. A fine bitter chocolate, Holmes. Well balanced, a pleasant, lingering finish. Perhaps a touch of fruitiness. I offered, quite proud of my description. He merely gave a faint, almost imperceptible shake of his head. And this one, he asked, presenting another from a different batch, yet from the same factory and brand. I tasted it. Very similar, Holmes. Perhaps a fraction less intense in the bitterness, but equally excellent. Indeed, he replied, a glint entering his eye. To the untrained palate, it is virtually identical. But observe the subtle nuances. In the first, there is a warmth, a roundedness that speaks of pure cocoa. In the second, Watson, there is a fleeting moment, just before the finish, of something metallic. A whisper of brass, perhaps, or a faint, sterile tang, gone almost as soon as it registers. It is like the ghost of a flavor, a vibration rather than a definitive taste, yet it is there. I tried again, concentrating with all my might, but the sensation he described eluded me. I confess, Holmes, my senses are not so finely tuned. I taste only the chocolate. Precisely, he said, rising from his chair. And that, my dear Watson, is the cunning of our adversary. This is not a poison that announces itself with a scream, but with a barely perceptible sigh. It is designed to pass unnoticed by the very professionals whose job it is to ensure purity, yet subtly enough to cause discord in the consumer's digestive system or dampen their vital spirits over time. He went on to demonstrate how he could, with increasing consistency, identify certain batches that carried this faint aroma of suspicion. He noted how these were often from specific production lines within a factory, or even particular shifts. It was not every bar, not every day, but a pattern was undeniably emerging. The affected chocolate might have a barely detectable grit, or dissolve on the tongue with a fractionally different speed, or even lack the perfect, resonant snap when broken. These were observations so minute, so fleeting, that they were dismissed as natural variations by the factory's quality controllers. While Holmes delved into the physical and sensory evidence, I applied myself to the mountain of consumer complaints Herr Richter had provided. My task was to correlate the health complaints with the specific brands and, where possible, the production dates of the chocolate consumed. It was a painstaking process, but patterns began to emerge. Digestive upsets, general malaise, and reports of lingering fatigue were disproportionately linked to certain brands, specifically those produced by the larger, more reputable manufacturers that were suffering the most significant sales declines. Moreover, within these brands, certain lot numbers, though not uniformly affected, showed a higher incidence of reported issues. Holmes, I announced one evening, spreading my meticulously arranged notes across our temporary lodgings table in Bern. There is a definite correlation. Brands Alpenedel and Escockelade Royal account for nearly 60% of the specific health complaints, despite representing only 40% of the market share. Furthermore, a cluster of complaints from last month specifically points to Alpenedel batches produced on the 10th and 12th, and Escockelade Royal from the 15th and 18th. Holmes nodded, his eyes still fixed on a magnifying glass as he examined a minute flake of chocolate. Excellent, Watson. Your diligence provides the framework for my microscopic observations. The metallic tang I detected, for instance, was present in nearly all the samples I tasted from those very batches. It suggests not a haphazard, random act, but a targeted, albeit intermittent, intervention. Our saboteur is not merely polluting the well, he is carefully tainting specific drafts. He pushed aside the chocolate flake and stood up, walking to the window overlooking the quiet Bernese street. The problem, then, is not one of a universally tainted product, but of individual doses. Our adversary is not broadcasting his venom but whispering it into specific ears. This requires access, opportunity, and a level of control within the very heart of the operations. The question remains, Watson, what is this elusive agent, and who possesses the means and the motive to deploy it with such diabolical precision? The puzzle, far from simplifying, was deepening into a labyrinth of subtle distinctions and calculated deceit. The sweetness of the chocolate, once a symbol of Swiss pride, was now merely a cloak for a most bitter and complex crime. Chapter 4: The Ingredient of Deception. Holmes's initial deductions regarding the faint metallic aftertaste and the subtle textural discrepancies had provided a crucial vector for our investigation. He dismissed outright the possibility of any crude or fast-acting poison. Such an agent, Watson, he had explained, gesturing with a chocolate-stained finger, would be too easily traced. A single fatality, a severe and acute illness, would immediately trigger a nationwide recall and intensive forensic analysis that even the most cunning villain could not evade. No, our adversary is far more sophisticated, far more insidious in his methods. He had procured several samples of the suspect chocolate, not merely for tasting, but for deeper, more scientific scrutiny. Back in our temporary lodgings, the air often hung heavy with the mingled scents of cocoa, ethanol, and various chemical reagents. Holmes had transformed a corner of the room into a makeshift laboratory, drawing upon his formidable knowledge of chemistry and toxicology. He meticulously crushed fragments, dissolved them in solvents, and subjected them to a series of tests that went far beyond the routine quality controls of the factories. The complaints, Watson, he mused one evening, hunched over a microscope, are telltale. Digestive upset, lassitude, chronic fatigue. These are not the hallmarks of acute poisoning, but rather of a subtle, persistent attack on the body's equilibrium. An irritant, perhaps, that slowly undermines the natural processes, or a compound that mimics a nutritional deficiency, drawing energy from the consumer without leaving a distinct chemical footprint. After days of painstaking work, often extending into the small hours, Holmes finally made a breakthrough. He identified not a direct poison, but rather a catalyst. "Observe, Watson," he announced, motioning me towards the microscope. "Do you see these minute, crystalline structures? They are present in the affected samples, and entirely absent in the control batches." I peered into the eyepiece. "They appear to be some sort of mineral deposit, Holmes." "Or perhaps—" "Precisely. Not a heavy metal in toxic quantities, nor an organic pathogen in a form easily identified," he interrupted, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "But a finely milled, virtually insoluble silicate, specially treated to encapsulate a minute quantity of a particular enzyme inhibitor. This inhibitor, in such minuscule doses, is harmless on its own. But when consumed repeatedly, particularly by individuals with sensitive constitutions, it subtly interferes with the absorption of essential micronutrients in the digestive tract. It's not poisoning, Watson, it's nutritional sabotage." He explained further, "The silicate particles are so fine they blend seamlessly with the cocoa solids, passing unnoticed by visual inspection. When consumed, they slowly release the encapsulated inhibitor. This inhibitor then disrupts the body's natural enzymatic processes responsible for breaking down and absorbing certain vitamins and minerals. The result is a gradual onset of the symptoms Richter described: fatigue, digestive discomfort, and a general feeling of being unwell, all without any detectable poison in the bloodstream or in the chocolate itself, as the active agent dissipates rapidly upon release, leaving only the inert silicate." This ingenious method explained everything: the difficulty in detection, the subtle health problems, and the lack of a clear smoking gun. The contaminant wasn't meant to kill, but to slowly erode the public's health and, by extension, their trust in Swiss chocolate. "The beauty of this villainy, from the perpetrator's perspective, is its very invisibility," Holmes continued. "The metallic aftertaste I detected was likely the subtle flavor of the silicate base itself, or perhaps a slight reaction it causes with other components in the chocolate. The structural changes in texture are due to its presence, however minute. It passes all conventional checks, leaving our good chocolatiers baffled and frustrated." The question then turned to the point of introduction. Ruling out raw cocoa beans, a global commodity too difficult to control, and the final packaging stage, too many hands, too little time for precise dosing, Holmes focused on the intermediate stages. The contaminant must be introduced at a point where it can be thoroughly mixed but also precisely dosed into specific batches, he reasoned. It must be soluble enough in the melted chocolate to disperse evenly, yet robust enough to withstand the heat of the conching process. My analysis suggests that the most likely points of entry are either during the addition of refined sugar, the cocoa butter, or the emulsifiers. These are bulk ingredients, often added from large hoppers or tanks, and a carefully placed saboteur could easily introduce a precise measure of this treated silicate into a particular batch. He spread a diagram of a typical chocolate factory floor plan on the table, marking potential points of intervention. Consider the opportunities, Watson. A momentary lapse in supervision, a brief diversion of attention, and a small, undetectable packet could be introduced. Our villain does not need to contaminate the entire supply, only enough specific batches to spread the symptoms and erode confidence. The pattern of affected batches, your correlations, Watson, perfectly align with this theory of targeted, intermittent contamination at a specific processing stage. The pieces were beginning to fit, sketching a chilling portrait of a meticulously planned and executed industrial espionage, cloaked in the deceptive sweetness of chocolate. The next step, Holmes declared, was to identify the hands that were feeding this insidious deception into the very heart of the Swiss chocolate industry. Chapter 5: The Hand in the Vat. With the nature of the deceitful substance now elucidated, Holmes's attention shifted from the machines and their output to the very operatives who handled them. The silicate dust, as fine as the fraud it concealed, pointed not to mechanical error or hygienic lapse, but to a nefarious intentionality. The fault lay not with the cocoa, nor the processes, but with the human hands that guided them. Watson, Holmes declared one morning, as we observed a production line in a factory on the outskirts of Bern. The key to this enigma lies not in the chemistry of the chocolate, but in human psychology. Our substance is introduced with surgical precision, not at random. This requires intimate knowledge of the processes and unrestricted access to specific points in the production chain. He then dedicated himself to observing the workers with an almost supernatural intensity. Not merely their labor, but their habits, their interactions, and, most crucially, their anomalies. We began frequenting factory canteens, changing rooms, and break areas, always with a plausible excuse, an academic interest in the efficiency of Swiss industry, or a study of working conditions. "Note that man, Watson," he whispered to me, subtly indicating a middle-aged operative pushing a trolley of ingredients. "Johann Schmidt. He works in the sugar and cocoa butter addition section. A methodical man, a good worker, according to the foreman. But observe his pocket watch. An IWC Schaffhausen, an expensive model, certainly beyond the means of an ordinary laborer. And his tie, though tucked beneath his work apron, is of fine silk, not the usual cotton." These observations, seemingly trivial, accumulated rapidly. Holmes noted a gleam of gold on a finger that should have been unadorned, footwear of fine leather unsuited to declared wages, or even a sudden improvement in a worker's family living standards, revealed through a casually overheard conversation. These were not grand expenditures, but small luxuries, inconsistent with their incomes. More than the affluence, Holmes sought behavioral patterns. He identified a network of individuals, not necessarily close colleagues, but dispersed across different sections of the same factory and, as we soon realized, across different factories we visited. There was a subtle tension in their shoulders, a furtive glance when passing a control point, or a slight hesitation before performing a task that should have been routine. "See that woman, Fraulein Meyer," Holmes indicated on another occasion. "She is responsible for overseeing emulsification. Records show that on the days when our suspect samples were produced, she invariably took her break exactly 15 minutes earlier than usual, returning with a somewhat forced air of refreshment. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the repetition of such coincidence in various locations and with multiple individuals is more than mere happenstance. With my assistance, we cross-referenced the names and work schedules of these individuals with the batches of chocolate Holmes had identified as contaminated. The correlation was unsettling. Whenever Johann Schmidt was on shift during the addition of crucial ingredients, or Fraulein Meyer supervised emulsification, there was a statistically significant probability that the subsequent batch would exhibit Holmes's metallic tank and eventually generate health complaints. "The method is ingenious in its simplicity and its dispersion," Holmes explained. "No single individual contaminates the entire production. Each is a link in a chain, introducing minuscule, controlled doses. The volume of production is vast, and the substance is undetectable by standard analyses. They need not be chemical experts, merely obedient and discreet." The network, once invisible, began to take shape, composed of seemingly loyal, anonymous workers who, for financial compensation, were undermining the very industry that employed them. These were the hands in the vat, individuals bought and strategically placed to infect specific batches of chocolate. Their motivation was money, but the mind behind this operation, the true brain orchestrating this army of betrayal, still lingered in the shadows. Holmes rubbed his hands together, a gleam of anticipation in his eyes. "Watson, the pattern is clear. We have the how and the who of the actions. Now, we need the why and the who of the mastermind. And I have a strong suspicion that the answer to those questions will lead us not deeper into the Swiss valleys, but perhaps a little further east, where competition is fiercer and ethics, perhaps, less rigorous." The stage was set. The web of betrayal within the Swiss factories was now visible, and Holmes was ready to pull the threads that would lead him back to its architect. Chapter 6: The German Gambit. With the intricate tapestry of local sabotage now clearly discernible, Holmes shifted his focus from the minute acts of individual treachery to the grand design that orchestrated them. The pattern of affected factories, brands, and even specific shifts, coupled with the telltale affluence of the saboteurs, painted a picture too vast and too coordinated for mere disgruntled employees or petty grievances. There was a puppet master pulling these strings, and his shadow stretched far beyond the Swiss Alps. "Watson," Holmes began one chilly evening, tracing lines on a map of Central Europe that he had pinned to the wall, "our local operatives, though crucial, are mere foot soldiers. They are the instruments, not the intellect. Their motivation is simple lucre, a desire for an easier life purchased at the expense of their nation's reputation. But who profits from this widespread discrediting of an entire industry? Who stands to gain most profoundly from Switzerland's chocolate falling into disrepute?" The answer, when considered logically, was self-evident. "A competitor, Holmes," I ventured, thinking of the global market. "Precisely, my dear fellow, but not just any competitor. One with the capacity for such a grand and insidious scheme. Consider the geography." He tapped a point just east of Switzerland. Germany. A nation with its own burgeoning chocolate industry, eager to carve out a larger share of the European and global markets. While the Swiss industry has faltered, which nation's chocolate sales have, perhaps, experienced an uncharacteristic surge? Holmes had already dispatched several coded telegrams, not to the local authorities, whom he deemed too slow and conventional for the delicate political implications of such a revelation, but to his more discreet contacts. Foremost among these was, naturally, Mycroft, whose vast network of intelligence often provided the macroscopic view that complemented Holmes's microscopic deductions. Days later, a reply arrived, terse and to the point, yet laden with profound implications. Mycroft's agents, with their quiet access to international trade figures and corporate intelligence, confirmed Holmes's suspicion. While Swiss chocolate exports had indeed plummeted, a prominent German confectionery conglomerate, Obermayr Schokolade, had seen an unprecedented and inexplicable rise in its market share, particularly in regions where Swiss brands had traditionally dominated. Herr Gustav Obermayr, Holmes pronounced, holding a financial report from the firm. A man known for his aggressive business practices, his ruthless ambition, and a reputation for crushing rivals, though never through means so subtle. The deeper analysis of Obermayer's accounts revealed certain anomalies. Large, untraceable payments to shell companies registered in various tax havens. These payments, while ostensibly for marketing consultations or market research, bore an unsettling resemblance to the sums necessary to maintain a scattered network of paid saboteurs. The timing of these payments also correlated suspiciously with the commencement and escalation of the chocolate complaints in Switzerland. Obermayer's genius, if one can call such villainy by that term, Holmes elucidated, lies in identifying the precise weakness, the human element in a technologically advanced industry. He did not seek to invent a better chocolate, but to destroy the perception of his rival's excellence. He understood that a direct attack would be too easily parried. Instead, he chose the slow poison of doubt, the insidious erosion of trust. The web of paid people, as the initial request put it, was indeed a masterstroke of industrial espionage. Obermayer's agents, likely operating independently of each other, would have identified disgruntled or financially strained employees within various Swiss factories. They would then have offered them handsome, untraceable sums for performing seemingly innocuous, yet strategically vital, actions, adding a precise, pre-measured dose of the silicate compound into a specific vat, or delaying a quality check, or ensuring that a particular batch passed through a compromised stage. Each saboteur knew only their small part, oblivious to the grander, devastating mosaic they were constructing. This explains the diversity of the saboteurs we identified, Watson, Holmes continued, pointing to our compiled list. They come from different departments, different skill sets, different levels of the hierarchy. Each was chosen for their access and their vulnerability. Obermeyer understood that consistency in sabotage was less important than widespread, random impact, creating an impression of systemic failure rather than targeted attack. Chapter 7: The Sweet Trap. With Obermeyer's nefarious scheme laid bare, the challenge morphed from detection to apprehension. To merely present his deductions would be insufficient. The insidious nature of the sabotage demanded concrete, irrefutable proof, a saboteur caught in the very act. Holmes, therefore, set about devising a trap as meticulously crafted as the finest Swiss watch. "We cannot simply accuse Watson," he explained, pacing our Bernese sitting room. "The compound, as we know, dissipates. Without the physical act, without the instrument of its introduction, Obermeyer would deny all, and our network of purchased souls would vanish like smoke. We must force their hand, and be there to observe it." Holmes selected Herr Richter, our initial petitioner, and the owners of two of the most severely affected factories, Herr Brunner of Alpenedel and Frau Dubois of Skockelade Royal, for a confidential meeting. He laid out his findings with chilling precision: the undetectable silicate, the enzyme inhibitor, the web of internal saboteurs, and the orchestrating hand of Obermeyer. The initial shock and disbelief quickly gave way to outrage and a steely determination to assist. The plan, dubbed the Sweet Trap by Holmes, was elegantly simple, yet reliant on timing and absolute secrecy. A rumor was carefully circulated within the factories that a new, exceptionally high-value batch of chocolate, destined for a prestigious international exhibition, was to be produced on a specific line and shift at the Alpenedel factory. This particular batch would contain a rare, expensive cocoa bean, making its contamination not only economically damaging but a significant blow to national prestige. This rumor, it was hoped, would be irresistible to Obermeyer's network, signaling a prime target for disruption. The vulnerability must be perceived as genuine, Holmes instructed Brunner. And the information must spread through the natural channels of factory gossip, not official pronouncements. Our saboteur must believe he is acting on confidential intelligence. On the designated night, the chosen production line at Alpenedel was buzzing with a simulated activity. Ordinary cocoa beans were used, of course, but the appearance of rarity was maintained. Holmes and I, along with Herr Richter, Herr Brunner, and a select few trusted security personnel from the factory, took up positions in an observation gallery, strategically darkened and soundproofed. A newly installed, discrete camera, a marvel of modern photographic technology, was focused on the mixing station, the precise point Holmes had identified as the most likely entry for the contaminant. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a palpable silence punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the machinery below. Hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. The shift began, workers moving with their usual diligence. Holmes, ever vigilant, scrutinized each face, each movement, through his opera glasses. "Our man, or woman, will be wary," he whispered to me, his voice barely audible. "They know the stakes. They will choose their moment with utmost care when supervision is lax, when attention is diverted." Suddenly, a slight movement caught Holmes's eye. Fraulein Schmidt, the very same individual Holmes had previously noted for her unusual break timings during the emulsification process, was approaching the mixing station. She was not assigned to this particular section for this shift, but had requested to assist due to a sudden shortage of hands. Her presence, though seemingly innocuous, set Holmes's nerves on edge. She moved with an exaggerated casualness, chatting briefly with a colleague, then leaning over the immense mixing vat as if inspecting the consistency of the melting chocolate. For a fraction of a second, her body obscured the view of her hands from other workers. Chapter 8: The Bitterness of Betrayal and the Taste of Truth. The immediate aftermath of Fraulein Schmidt's apprehension was a maelstrom of activity. Her initial denials quickly crumbled under the weight of the undeniable photographic evidence and Holmes's relentless questioning. Confronted with the camera's unblinking record of her nefarious act and the tangible proof of the silicate vial, her carefully constructed composure shattered. The fear of exposure and the harsh reality of her betrayal overwhelmed her. In a tearful confession, she divulged the details of Obermeier's network. She was but one of many, approached discreetly, offered sums far beyond her wildest dreams for seemingly minor tasks. The instructions were always precise: which batch, which day, which exact point in the process. She knew little of the grand scheme, only that her actions would subtly harm the chocolate, not poison it outright. Her testimony, coupled with the evidence gathered by Holmes, provided the undeniable link to the German magnate, Gustav Obermeier. The scientific confirmation of the compound's effects followed swiftly. With Fraulein Schmidt's vial in hand, and samples of the affected chocolate now understood for their hidden contaminant, the Swiss laboratories were able to replicate Holmes's findings with precision. The treated silicate, encapsulating its enzyme inhibitor, was identified. Its subtle, insidious effect on human digestion and nutrient absorption was scientifically validated. The ghost in the machine had a name, a form, and a devastating purpose. News of the exposure sent shockwaves through the European industrial landscape. Obermeier Schokolade, once enjoying an unexplained surge in sales, found itself embroiled in a scandal of unprecedented proportions. Investigations, spearheaded by the Swiss authorities and supported by Mycroft Holmes's quiet intelligence, were launched simultaneously in Germany and across the continent. The web of paid collaborators began to unravel with astonishing speed, as fear and self-preservation led others to confess, each testimony corroborating the cunning villainy of their paymaster. Obermeier himself was arrested, his empire crumbling around him, built as it was on a foundation of deceit and malice. For Herr Richter and the entire Swiss Chocolate Manufacturers Association, it was a moment of profound relief and vindication. The good name of Swiss chocolate, dragged through the mud by whispers and inexplicable ailments, was now gloriously restored. The metallic tang was not a fault of the chocolate itself, but the signature of a calculated betrayal. The health problems were not psychosomatic, but the result of deliberate, criminal interference. As we prepared for our return to London, the Swiss mountains seemed to gleam with a renewed brilliance, and the scent of pure, unadulterated cocoa once again filled the air, untainted by suspicion. I packed my notes, reflecting on the extraordinary journey from a dreary Baker Street afternoon to the dramatic climax in a Swiss chocolate factory. It was a most remarkable case, Holmes, I remarked, as he carefully packed his microscope and reagents. To unearth such a subtle form of sabotage, one that eluded the combined efforts of an entire nation's finest minds and most advanced technology. Your genius, my dear fellow, remains unparalleled. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a rare sign of satisfaction. The human element, Watson, is always the most complex and the most revealing. Obermeier believed he could outwit nature itself, turning sweetness into subtle poison and trust into widespread doubt. But he underestimated the capacity of the human intellect to discern the unseen, and the fundamental truth that purity, whether of character or of chocolate, will, in the end, always reveal itself. He paused, a flicker of his characteristic humor in his eyes. And I dare say, Watson, a properly made Swiss chocolate, untainted by malice, possesses a far superior flavor than any concoction born of German ambition. The true taste of triumph, my dear fellow, is often the sweetest. With that, he lit his pipe, and the familiar aroma of strong tobacco, rather than cocoa, filled the room, signaling the conclusive end to the case of the Alpine annihilation. The mountain still stood, and the chocolate once again tasted of triumph.